follows her historic fight.
Can the bartender tell you?
So the film, as you just saw. Okay.
You got it. They're working on it.
Stand. It's okay. Just smile. It'll all work out.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank goodness.
So, as you just saw, Knock Down the House witnesses her historic fight to represent the most diverse district in the country and put working people at the center of our politics. Thanks to her tireless efforts and those of a whole movement across the district, across the city, across the country, we can now proudly call her one of our leaders in Washington.
Woo!
As we all know, the fight isn't over. And at this time of national and really global crisis, intertwined multiple crises, I hope that the film can make everyone who sees it feel like they have a role to play in the democratic process, because the more we participate, the more of us lend our hands to that process, the more chance there is that impossible things can become possible.
Yeah. Thank you.
Rachel won't say it herself, but she's truly an incredible filmmaker.
Yes.
And I think there's something that's really special about this film to me, and in my relationship to it, because I know what she did and what she went through in the process of making this film, which honestly I think could be a film into itself, because it was this weird meta situation where she was very scrappily making a documentary, and she would bring her then 1-year-old on the back of an ATV and bringing him across the country. And neither one of us knew that this was going to work out. She was doing a film and we were running a long shot congressional campaign, and they were both entirely to the cynics' flights of fancy. And the idea that we won still to me is inconceivable.
Yes.
And I remember when I first started, when I first got to the halls of Congress and I saw that plaque outside my office with my name on it, I felt like I had snuck in. I felt like that there was a glitch in the system that we had to exploit as long as possible. Because how I felt was like I didn't know how long I was going to be allowed in. I didn't know how long I was going to be allowed to stay. And so part of it may have felt like outside what felt like courage, to me felt like if I only have one chance, if I only have one term, how will I have wanted to have spent it? And this film, I think, what's really important is since it came out on Netflix earlier this year, people seeing not just my story, but Amy's story, but Cori Bush's story, seeing and all the volunteers as well that were in this film, they really believe in American democracy again. And I can't understate how important that is, because I know when I was running with this belief that maybe democracy is salvageable in America, but I wasn't sure that it was, and I just wanted to try. And I think this year we're seeing a lot of people directly impacted by this film deciding to run for office, deciding to run for their PTA, deciding to run for city council, deciding to run for Congress, deciding to step up in ways that they never before thought was possible. And I think ultimately that is the purpose of this film. And just like our campaign was like a little campaign that could, the idea of this film being as widely recognized as it is, with the tiny ass budget that it had, frankly, is really inconceivable. It didn't have, this wasn't a multi-million-dollar funded project. When I first met Rachel, I was like, you're interested in me? Like, in this? We had no chance of winning, and yet we did. And the idea that this film has even been shortlisted for an Oscar, I think it's just a really big deal. It's a really big deal to working people. It's a really big deal, I think, to people in communities that have felt like this country and our democracy is not designed for them to win. And to see us win, to see everyday people win, is, I think, the greatest hope that we have for our democracy, and it's really what we need right now in this moment. And I just thank you all for bearing witness to it and for giving it a chance. And you know, I've heard people all year, especially the little affirmation scene. I wasn't expecting that to resonate with so many people, but you know, people print it out and they put it. I've seen them put it on their cubicles and things, because we have to make ourselves believe. We have to remind ourselves that our future belongs to us, and it's what we choose to make it, as dire as it can seem. But what we always say is that it's always darkest before dawn. But we believe that that dawn is coming, and we're working for that dawn to happen. So I thank you all very, very much. That being said, you know, if there are any questions, I'm sure Rachel and I are happy to. When are you running for president? I get in too much trouble for that.
So if a documentarian were to approach you right now, that you're on the other side of a successful election, what level of access would you be comfortable giving them at this point?
Well, this is actually something that Rachel and I have discussed too, about what would happen after. I think this past year, just overall, was so overwhelming that I couldn't even think of like adding a third job on top of the job of being a member of Congress, also being an organizer. I continue to campaign in a holistic sense. Now I think there's like more of an opening for that. I think one of the most transformative things that we try to do is to make Congress, to dispel the myths of Congress, and to make it as transparent as possible. And so that's a longer, in terms of a project, I don't know, but I think overall we want to, as much as I'm able to in the context of my work, I want to provide full transparency. I once heard, when I was at BU, I took this class. It was literally called Power and Legitimacy. And one of the central tenets of power that was discussed is mystery. The way that authority gets established is by creating an aura of mystery. And that aura of mystery is, I know things that you don't. I understand operations that you are not yet acquainted to. And when you dispel mystery, you dismantle power. And that is one of the main reasons why I have been so insistent on creating transparency. Because everyday people have been conned into believing they're not good enough to lead. And we are.
Yep.
Alex, can I ask you a question? I was so inspired to see you essentially debate by yourself in the film. It's incredibly moving. And I'm wondering if hopefully we have the opportunity to see Mr. Sanders approach a debate stage. I'm personally fearful that our Democratic representative in that opportunity won't have an opportunity to debate with Mr. Trump because he will deny that engagement. And I'm wondering what your advice would be to Mr. Sanders.
Well, I think the thing is for the senator, for anyone, so we have to win decisively this year. In the general and in just in general, but particularly I don't think we can really afford to have a super close or super contested or super nasty. You know, there are differences. It's important for us to articulate what we believe and be clear in our beliefs. But especially in the general election, we need to be very decisive in our victory, and that's going to take a lot of work for us. So for me, it's not even about giving advice to another candidate or giving advice to the senator. It's about giving advice to ourselves, because we need to turn up and we need to turn out this year, so we can very vocally check the rise in corporate power and in fascism in America, quite frankly. So I think it's really about what we need to do as people and how we need to mobilize as everyday people in order to make sure that we usher that positive change.
Can I ask you a question about climate change? You've been amazing with the Green New Deal. And I just heard Bill McKibben speak, and he said, as many others have, we only have a decade to turn this around. And he suggested that at this point we have solutions like the Solutions Project and Project Drawdown. But what we need now is political and social leadership to make the change. So I'm wondering if you could give us like 3 applicable steps and anything else we could add.
So that's an excellent point, because it's true. We have all of the technology, and we have the capacity, and we have the capital to help avert climate disaster. There's a certain level that has already been uncorked that we are going to have to deal with in our lives. But we have the ability to really protect ourselves and our children and our grandchildren from the worst. And it's not a question of technological capacity, it is a question of political will. And frankly, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I find this film to be very strategic, because this film is a political tool. And I'll be very explicit in that. We need to mobilize people to run for office, because right now we do not have the votes to save our planet, period. And we need to make the votes and create the space to have and establish that political will. Part of that comes from pressing people who are already in office to do the right thing, but frankly, a lot of it requires a new Congress. And it's very controversial for an incumbent to say that, but if anything, being in Congress has only solidified and reinforced that belief. There are a lot of people who will say that they believe in things in theory, but will not believe in those things with their actions. And we do not have time to slowly evolve ourselves to that position. There are a lot of areas where people think that's okay, but this is not one. We do have a deadline. We have to drive down our carbon emissions by 50%, and we need people who are not beholden to the financial structure of fossil fuels. And there are far too many in both parties that are. We need to make sure that we return our democracy to the people again, away from corporate infrastructure and from industry infrastructure. So the way that we do that, I think, is by engaging a lot of political education, encouraging people to run for office, and also encouraging people to support those to run for office. Not everybody needs to run. You know, some people feel that calling, and for people who feel that calling, I think it's important that we are supportive of those who carry themselves with integrity and feel themselves to the calling of not just going to elected office, but being a public servant. But there are also people who feel called to be campaign managers, communications directors, journalists, educators, and we have to support those types of public service as well. We need an entire infrastructure to make that political will happen.
Congressmember, from climate change to immigration to the issue of war and peace, you're now weighing in on the world stage. President Trump just had the number 2 man in Iran, General Soleimani, assassinated. What is your response to this, and what do you think needs to be done?
Well, we've been really looking at how we're going to respond, because it's not enough to just say no war in Iran. We need to be tactical about how we can actively resist further escalation on already an unprecedented level of escalation and aggression by the president and therefore by the United States. He did this on behalf of our entire country, and that's what makes the potential illegality of his action so flagrant, because he did not consult Congress, and this was not done with the support of the United States. But in his seat as the president, this has now been an act of aggression committed by the United States. And so one is that we have to hold him accountable, which, you know, to me, I believe we need to enact the War Powers Resolution, demand that he come before Congress, and without getting permission, we must draw back support. But also, I believe that Representative Ro Khanna, he introduced an amendment to the defense authorization last year that could have prevented all of this. He introduced an amendment that prevented any funding for offensive action in Iran, and it was overwhelmingly passed bipartisan. It passed the House with Republican and Democratic support, and then it was stripped by Democratic and Republican leadership. And so Had his amendment passed, it could have prevented all of this. But nevertheless, it can prevent further horrific actions from occurring and undemocratic actions from occurring. And I think we need to reintroduce his amendment as a standalone bill and see if we can pass it again. But again, none of this happens. We don't fix any of this domestically or in terms of or internationally without the votes and without the political will. And that's why I think that inspiring people to enter this process, you know, we gotta get the votes inside and outside, you know, out in the streets and in Congress. And the way that we do that is by inspiring people and demystifying this process for everyday people to be able to engage. And I think whether it's this vehicle or Instagram or, you know, engaging on social media ourselves, that's one of the ways that we can truly powerfully transform our democracy. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.